Xavier Legette is the ultimate test for what you look for in a wide receiver. If projectable athleticism and yards after catch ability are some of your top traits, it is easy to see how you can fall in love with Xavier Legette. Most analytical principles, including anything that values early production, scores Legette pretty lowly. On this segment from the Fantasy for Real podcast, I explore the pros and cons of Xavier Legette, my wide receiver 15. Xavier Legette, the wide receiver from South Carolina who had an excellent combine. So let's get into some of those numbers from that excellent combine. Now, he was originally listed at 6'3", so you have to be a little disappointed that he's 6'1". But as I constantly say about size, the number one thing I'm always on the lookout for are outliers, specifically negative outliers. And Xavier Legette is obviously not a player who's going to be in that area. He's all great everywhere at 6'1", 221 pounds, and a 31 7/8 inch arms. He specifically has an excellent BMI to go with some very decent size. And then at that heavy BMI, he ran a 4.39, 91st percentile vertical jump, 79th percentile broad jump, and a 9.8 out of 10 incomplete relative athletic score, because he did not do any agility testing. He did not do any 3-cone. He did not do any shuttle. So we do not have the full RAS score. He avoided the agility drills, or essentially didn't do the agility drills. I should stop saying the word avoided. But he tested extremely well in what he tested at the combine. So we just talked about a player that had a positional change be one of the main excuses for why he failed to produce or catch the NFL's attention earlier. Xavier Legette playing quarterback is something that gets brought up, but it's not the same thing. And we're going to start getting into some of the reasons why I have taken so long to get Xavier Legette even to wide receiver 15. But it just feels like more fiction than fact to me to even talk about Xavier Legette playing quarterback. A lot of players play different positions in high school. A lot of players play multiple positions in high school. And Xavier Legette did play some wide receiver, and he did run a little bit at the quarterback position. And it was mostly just his last year or 2 years that he played quarterback. And it would be one thing to me if he entered college as a quarterback. But from what I've seen, that's not what happened. He entered college as someone who was immediately expected to play wide receiver and was listed as either an athlete or a wide receiver and never a quarterback when he was listed by, say, recruiting services or written about in articles. It was mostly like the wide receiver that my team is looking to get is coming for a visit. So for all the excusing of situation that I do from time to time, I really have a hard time with the Xavier Legette played quarterback thing, because Xavier Legette played quarterback in high school. A lot of people played different positions in high school. I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, and quarterback is a different position, but Ashton Jeanty is one of my favorite just players in college football right now, and his whole thing is that he played so many different positions in high school because he played overseas in Italy or something, because he's a military kid, and that's just the football league he was able to play at, and he was the best player on the team, so he played every position. And it's basically the reason that Ashton Jeanty is such a good running back and such a good pass catcher and does so many different things well. And so I don't buy into the excuse of in high school they asked him to play a different position for a couple years, and so that completely ruined his ability to play wide receiver for the next 4 years of college. That doesn't make any sense to me. So maybe there's something within that narrative, within that story I'm missing, but every time I've looked into the Xavier Legette played quarterback thing, it has never made much sense to me. And I'm all for finding reasons to, excuse situations. I don't want to, it's not like I'm looking to excuse situations, but I'm always looking to contextualize what's going on with players' careers. And this context does not make sense for me as an excuse, especially because what was his production? 9 for 80 and a touchdown, 7 for 113 and a touchdown, 80 for 63 and a touchdown. You might be thinking to yourself, well, why are we complaining? Those are pretty good games. Those are his years. Those are his first 3 years. 90 for 80 and a touchdown, 7 for 113 and a touchdown, 8 for 63 and a touchdown. And in year 4, he had 18 for 167 and 3 touchdowns. So, better, but that's his 4th year, his senior year. He had 167 yards, and that was a career high. So he has this great breakout season in 2023. 71 receptions, 1,255 yards, 7 touchdowns, and he does a lot of things really well, right? Now, he's not a perfect route runner. He's not the cleanest, crispest player. But when I talk about my wide receiver traits, I say that I like to break them down into two general overall categories that get a little bit more specific from there in separation and point of attack. And what I'm really looking for a lot of wide receivers is I like players who do well in both areas. Legette is someone who's shown a lot of upside in his traits in both areas, both as a guy who can make high-level contested catches and someone who can, extend plays as a yards after catch receiver, and also someone who has the at least physical traits to be able to separate from defenders. Maybe he can't do it consistently, maybe he can't do it with his footwork yet, but he does have some of the physical traits that translate into the ability to separate. That said, I do struggle with just the unevenness of his numbers against various competition levels. Now, I will say his overall numbers like yards per out run are very, very, very good. They're exactly what you want to look for. But I just don't like seeing when it is apparent to me that a player was beating up on the top competition a little bit, because South Carolina's in the SEC. That's the top of the top. The FCS is outside of the top 130 teams. South Carolina played an FCS team. They also played a team that was in the FCS last year. Xavier Legette in these two games had 335 yards combined between these two games. His two best games in the SEC were against Vanderbilt and Mississippi State. 120 against Vanderbilt, 189 against Mississippi State. Fantastic games, but these were the two worst teams in the SEC, and by a lot. Their combined SEC record in 2023, 1-15. 1-15. So Vanderbilt and Mississippi State had very bad years in 2023, and those were the two SEC teams more than anybody else that Legette beat up on. I believe he had 100 yards against Florida as well, but Florida wasn't that good either that year, or last year. So Xavier Legette did a lot of beating up on the lower teams. I'm not trying to dismiss what he's doing. I want to be very clear on that. The point in saying all this is not to dismiss what he accomplished last year, but it's not ideal when it is the one thing we're looking at. He's a one-year wonder. That is a true fact, all right? That is, I will take away from his first 4 years, because he didn't do anything his first 4 years. And he is a one-year wonder, and so it's hard when you're looking at a one-year wonder. You don't want to have things that don't look well under scrutiny. You want to have things that you can scrutinize and say, wow, this all looks good under the hood. Take a Nico Collins comparison. Why I like Nico Collins is that you can put Nico Collins, in my opinion, that season through any scrutiny you want, and it at least looks good, maybe great, probably spectacular, but it's never going to look bad. No matter how you scrutinize it, no matter how you look through it, it's never going to look bad. Okay? There's ways to scrutinize Xavier Legette's season that it doesn't look at least nearly as good as the seasonal numbers on paper. And then just a quick note on the yards after catch themselves. The yak numbers were great, and maybe this is attached a little bit more to the burst and his physical ability to explode as a ball carrier, but he didn't actually break as many missed forced tackles as I like to see, even from wide receivers in these kind of situations, or for guys that I'm projecting at high yak numbers. His missed forced tackles number was actually fairly pedestrian, and I didn't see a huge amount of broken tackles on film myself either. Now again, maybe that's just the explosive running ability and being able to outrun the competition and manipulate angles by being so fast in your acceleration that you create the bad pursuit angles. But at the end of the day, Xavier Legette, I would be more encouraged by the yak if it came with a little bit higher rate of actual missed force tackles. So ultimately, Xavier Legette is a player I can see winning several different ways. There's so many traits between his point of attack traits and his separation traits in terms of the raw physical traits that you really like and that you saw displayed for the first time in his career this year. Unfortunately, he really does hit a bunch of red flags for me, like really a lot of red flags, and he doesn't quite overcome them with athleticism and a good fifth year. If it was a spectacular fifth year, a fifth year that I agreed was spectacular in the SEC, that would be one thing, but it just doesn't quite come up to that expectation. So still, there are a lot of wide receivers in this class, and Legette is now tiered, again, closer to, say, my wide receiver 10 or 11, but as of right now, he ranks today as my wide receiver 15. That's all I have for this segment from the Fantasy for Real podcast. If you like the video, make sure to check out the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thanks, and I will see you next time.